We are focusing today on a case that has remained wide open for over 36 years. It's a story that sources describe as Canada's most tragic and spooky modern disappearance. We're talking about the Jack family, Ronald, Doreen, and their two sons, Russell and Ryan. They vanished just completely from Prince George, British Columbia, back in August of 1989. Our mission here is to take a really exhaustive look at the collected evidence, the family's history, and the persistent mystery that really defines this case.
It is an overwhelming tragedy, and not just for the immediate family, but for their entire community, the Jeslata Carrier Nation. We're looking at the facts surrounding the disappearance of Ronald and Doreen, who were both just 26 years old at the time, and their children, Russell, who was 9, and little Ryan, who was only 4. I think the critical element here, the thing that makes this case so utterly unique, is that 4 people, an entire young family, vanished at the same time. And it all happened after they accepted a job offer from a total stranger at a pub.
And the totality of it, that's what's so striking. The fact that they all disappeared together. This wasn't, a piecemeal thing. It was an entire family unit just erased in one night. The circumstances themselves feel almost engineered for mystery. You have a spontaneous job offer, a short-term commitment, the need for family accommodation, and it's all tied to a highly vulnerable family. It speaks to either incredible chance or, far more likely, a calculated exploitation of their desperation.
Yeah, when you look at the source material, the fact that an entire family, including small children, is involved, it just immediately sets off all the red flags. This was almost certainly not a voluntary departure. I mean, a single adult might choose to leave, sure.
Yeah.
But taking 2 young boys on a spontaneous, risky trip tied to a stranger's job offer at a logging camp, it just suggests a level of immediate, profound vulnerability that was tragically taken advantage of. We really need to understand exactly how desperate they were to even consider such a risk.
Let's unpack that. The difficult circumstances surrounding Ronald and Doreen in the lead up to August 1989. They were both born in 1963. Ronald in March and Doreen in April. So they were the same age. They were young parents, and their commitment to their family, despite all the struggles, seems really evident. Doreen had her first son, Russell, in 1980, and Ronald treated him as his own. That's a point noted by Ronald's mother, Mabel Jack, and it's a testament to their relationship. Their second son, Ryan, came along in 1985.
To really grasp their mindset, though, we have to contextualize the historical trauma that was just woven into Doreen's life and the lives of her sisters, Maria and Lorene. The sources paint a picture of an extremely difficult upbringing, and sadly, it was not uncommon in their community at that time. We see accounts of parental abandonment by their mother, which left them vulnerable to repeated and harrowing experiences, physical and sexual abuse at the hands of family friends. This was all compounded by just pervasive poverty within the local indigenous community. These systemic issues, they created this foundation of instability and trauma that they carried with them into adulthood.
And crucially, the sources explicitly link their childhood to the destructive legacy of the residential school system. Doreen, Maria, and Lorene were mistreated when they were sent as children to the Lejac Residential School, which was located near Fraser Lake. For those who might be unfamiliar, the residential school system was a state-sponsored, church-run system. It was designed to forcibly assimilate Indigenous children by stripping them of their culture, their language, their family bonds, and it often involved severe neglect and abuse.
Acknowledging the Levac residential school experience, it's not just adding context. It's fundamental to understanding the profound challenges the Jack family was up against. They were products of a system designed to dismantle stability and community trust. It provides the backdrop to the crisis they were facing in the late 1980s. So Ronald was a woodcutter, and when he suffered a back injury, he lost his job at the sawmill. This wasn't just losing an income. In that specific industry, that region, for a man described as desperate to work, it was a sudden, paralyzing blow to their economic viability.
That job loss was the absolute breaking point. It forced the family onto welfare, and that's what drove the relocation. They moved from their community to Prince George, a larger, more industrial city, explicitly seeking better job prospects. Ronald's mother, Mabel Jack, she emphasized that he was desperate to work. And that desperation, fueled by the immediate need to provide for his family and regain some stability, that's the key psychological state that leads us directly to the decision he makes.
The collapse was total. The sources paint a really grim picture of financial desperation, so extreme that Doreen reportedly resorted to stealing cough medicine for her children because she just couldn't afford basic necessities. I mean, when you have a parent committing petty theft just to treat their child's cold, you understand the level of destitution they were experiencing. It illustrates just how precarious their whole existence had become.
And this incredible external pressure, it began to erode the stability of their relationship. It added a domestic crisis on top of the financial one. The sources note that Doreen started drinking heavily, likely seeking some form of escape or relief from all that stress.
Yes, and sadly, their struggles became visible and painful. Doreen's sister Maria witnessed Ronald strike Doreen on more than one occasion. And while we have to approach that with sensitivity, understanding the intense stress and the historical trauma impacting their relationship is it's crucial. It shows a family unit that was buckling under pressure, not one that was inherently stable. And then there's a detail in the sources that introduces a really chilling external threat. Ronald had confided in his mother, Mabel, that he was in debt to someone for an undisclosed amount of money.
That debt shifts the narrative instantly, doesn't it? It moves beyond just standard poverty to potential coercion or danger. If Ronald was in debt and desperate for work, he wasn't just looking for an income. He might have been looking for fast cash, or maybe trying to escape whatever pressure that undisclosed debt imposed on him.
So when we synthesize all these elements, Ronald's job loss, his desperation, the relocation, the crushing welfare status, the domestic strife, and this lingering undisclosed debt, we see a family in extremis. They were psychologically and financially primed to accept any offer that promised immediate relief, regardless of how risky that offer sounded. And that context is so vital because it explains why Ronald would even entertain a spontaneous job offer from a complete stranger in a pub. It wasn't carelessness. It was a perceived necessity. It was a desperate lifeline in a state of deep crisis.
Okay, so let's move to the precise night of the vanishing, focusing on the specific encounter that determined their fate. It was Tuesday, August 1st, 1989. Ronald, still urgently seeking work after moving to Prince George, visited the First Leader pub, which was conveniently located just 4 blocks from their rented house on Strathcona Avenue.
Right, and this is where the narrative just pivots. It becomes high stakes. While at the pub, Ronald was approached by an unidentified man who offered him a job. The job was supposedly at a logging camp situated at or near Klukel's Lake. We should note the exact geography here. Klukel's Lake is only about 40 kilometers, so 24 miles west of Prince George. It's situated right off Highway 16. This is a logging region, so the cover story is immediately plausible.
And the offer itself was tailor-made to neutralize all of Ronald's immediate concerns. The duration was short, only 10 days to 2 weeks, so it promised a quick burst of income. But the truly manipulative element was the inclusion of the family. The offer involved work for Doreen as the camp cook and, most significantly, childcare services for Russell, who was 9, and Ryan, 4. For a couple struggling to find work and living on welfare, this was a complete all-in-one package, a solution to their entire crisis.
It addressed every single major hurdle for a working parent. Ronald wouldn't have to worry about paying for childcare or leaving his wife and children behind, which would have been nearly impossible given their financial state. This too-good-to-be-true quality is really the first sign of potential manipulation. But the most important physical evidence we have about this case comes from the detailed description of the man who made the offer.
It's an extraordinary level of detail. We need to walk through this slowly for you because it remains the single most important clue. The man was described as white, likely in his late 30s. He was exceptionally tall, estimated between 6 feet and 6 feet 6 inches. That's 183 to 198 centimeters. He was also heavyset, weighing between 200 to 275 pounds, so 91 to 125 kilograms. Just a very imposing physical presence, even without factoring in the rest of his appearance.
Exactly. And the description continues. He had reddish-brown hair and a full beard. His clothing suggested a working man, or maybe someone deliberately projecting that image. He wore a ball cap, a red checkered work shirt, faded blue jeans, and a blue nylon jacket. This is all very typical attire for the region and for the supposed job.
But the footwear detail is what always gets me. The witness recalled that he wore work boots that had distinctive leather fringes over the toes. That is a highly specific, memorable, and somewhat unusual detail. It should have made this man immediately recognizable to someone in the local community or, the industry. The depth of that description suggests the witness had a very, very clear visual of the man.
The fact that he was driving a 4-wheel pickup truck is also relevant. It was necessary to transport the family and their belongings to a remote logging site. And the Jack family obviously didn't have their own vehicle, so Ronald and the man left the pub around 11:16 p.m. They went back to the Strathcona Avenue residence to collect Doreen and the boys and pack up.
In the early hours of Wednesday, August 2nd, as they were preparing to leave, Ronald made two final, incredibly chilling phone calls. This is where you could almost feel Ronald's desperation clashing with his own intuitive alarm bells.
First, he called his brother in Burns Lake. He tried at the last minute to arrange for Russell and Ryan to stay with his brother, but the logistics just weren't possible. It couldn't be arranged. This attempt shows a flicker of deep parental concern, a moment where he tried to mitigate the risk he knew he was taking, maybe realizing the gravity of getting into a truck with a stranger.
And the second call, to his mother, Mabel Jack. This is the narrative linchpin. It is a direct premonition of danger. He ended the conversation with the stark, explicit instruction: look for him if he didn't come back.
That phrase, look for him, is a direct acknowledgement of danger, of potential foul play. It suggests Ronald either understood the risk was extreme, or perhaps something happened between leaving the pub and making that final call that confirmed his suspicions, confirmed that this job was a complete sham, or worse. That debt he was carrying might have played a role, making the decision to go both desperate and, well, dread-filled.
He knew he was walking into danger, but he felt unable to refuse. And we know they ultimately left because the final witnesses were two of Doreen's relatives, including her sister Lorene. They visited the house and saw the family loading their belongings into the unidentified man's pickup truck. They were seen departing Prince George, and they have been utterly, completely missing ever since the early morning hours of August 2nd, 1989. The family wasn't reported missing right away, which I suppose is common in cases where a family leaves for a supposed job. But it cost the investigation precious time. Ronald's mother, Mabel Jack, reported them missing in late August 1989. Several weeks after the departure, once that 2-week job period had passed and she'd heard nothing.
Right. And the initial assessment of the family's rented house on Strathcona Avenue provided crucial insight into their frame of mind. When police investigated, they found that the majority of the family's possessions, their furniture, most of their clothes, and significantly Russell and Ryan's school records, had all been left behind. This is strong physical evidence that they fully intended to return to Prince George within that short 10-day to 2-week window mentioned in the job offer. They were not planning a permanent move or a life change.
That makes the subsequent silence absolutely deafening. But one of the most painful aspects highlighted in the source material, it concerns the claims of systemic failures in the initial police response.
This is a critical point that really demands a thorough discussion. Various members of the Jack family, particularly Mabel Jack, they expressed that they encountered inadequate support from external organizations, including law enforcement. During that crucial initial search period, they firmly believed that this lack of prioritization was directly tied to their Indigenous background. And this points to a historical, deeply damaging pattern where missing persons cases involving Indigenous individuals just were not treated with the same urgency or resources as those involving non-Indigenous people.
We have to pause on that systemic failure because it highlights the vulnerability of the entire community. What specific barriers did Mabel Jack report facing?
Well, Mabel Jack and other family members detailed a frustrating lack of consistent communication and a general sense of dismissiveness from authorities in the weeks immediately following the report. She felt that the lack of immediate large-scale mobilization, which you would expect for 4 people, including 2 young children, disappearing simultaneously, was rooted in historical bias. When Indigenous individuals, particularly those struggling financially, disappear, authorities often jump to assumptions of voluntary relocation or typical transient behavior rather than immediate foul play. This bias meant the case was cold before it even got proper heat.
And then, adding immense insult to injury, there was a devastating procedural error early on that guaranteed the loss of critical time.
Yes. On September 7th, 1989, just a few weeks after the family was formally reported missing, the Prince George RCMP incorrectly informed the public that the Jack family had been located and found safe. This massive false alarm caused the investigation to be briefly closed. In a missing persons case, particularly one that was already weeks old, losing even a few days to a procedural error can destroy the chance of finding fresh evidence, or locating witnesses, or tracking the unidentified man's movement. It was a quantifiable loss of investigative time that they just could not recover.
It's just heartbreaking to imagine Mabel Jack's reaction, the brief hope and the crushing reality, and the knowledge that the authorities had stopped looking for her son and his family. So by the following year, the initial publicity efforts were limited and somewhat flawed.
Crime Stoppers did produce a televised reenactment in 1990. However, the sources highlight a significant flaw in the execution. The reenactment was broadcast on the local CKPG TV station. Crucially, that station did not have the broadcast reach to cover the suspected area of disappearance, the region around Klukultz Lake and Highway 16. So if the perpetrators or any witnesses were rural or transient or working deep in the logging areas, they simply would not have seen that crucial reenactment.
So the one major tool used to generate clues was geographically ineffective. By 1992, 3 years after the disappearance, the family was still missing and the case was undeniably cold. This is when the community had to step up where the system had failed.
They did. Ronald's mother, Mabel Jack, she partnered with the Prince George Native Friendship Center to start fundraising efforts. Their goal was highly practical, to increase the reward money and generate renewed, broader publicity. At that time, Crime Stoppers was only offering up to $2,000 for information leading to their whereabouts or an arrest. For a mass disappearance involving 4 people, a reward that low. It really underscores the lack of official resources and prioritization that had been dedicated to the investigation up to that point.
The family was essentially forced to shoulder the burden of the investigation and public awareness themselves, pouring emotional and financial resources into a system that had, at best, dropped the ball and, at worst, had neglected them due to systemic bias. Mabel Jack's tireless efforts to keep the case alive became essential because that initial window for finding the family had been so tragically closed by an inadequate early response. We move forward now, 7 years into the investigation, to Sunday, January 28, 1996. The case receives what is arguably the most significant, yet also the most frustrating, piece of evidence. An anonymous caller contacts the RCMP detachment in Vanderhoof, British Columbia, which is about 61 miles west of Prince George.
This call completely recontextualized the case. It went from a difficult missing persons file to a highly probable homicide investigation, although formal confirmation is still lacking. The call was startlingly brief and specific. The male caller stated unequivocally, quote, "The Jack family are buried at the south end of an unspecified ranch," and then he hung up, immediately after relaying just that single sentence.
That quote is the ghost in the machine. It provides the crucial piece of the puzzle. They are buried, suggesting foul play. But it leaves out the essential information, the name or the location of the ranch. The police were able to trace the origin of the call to a house located in nearby Stony Creek.
The police then launched an intensive effort to identify the caller. They even took the highly unusual step of releasing an audio tape of the man's voice and issuing a province-wide appeal, just begging the person who called to come forward. It was a desperate move. They knew that this voice held the key to closure, but the individual never responded to the public appeals.
And the circumstances under which the call was made added immense complexity to identifying the source.
Yes. The investigation determined that a party was actively being held at the Stony Creek house when the anonymous call was placed. This complicated matters immensely because police were unable to identify and interview all 6 to 9 partygoers who were present that morning. The caller could have been the host, a guest who stumbled upon sensitive information, or someone who was drinking and felt compelled to reveal a secret they'd been holding.
Right. If the caller was, say, drinking heavily, they might not even remember making the call, or they might have been so frightened of the consequences once they were sober that they refused to come forward. The anonymous nature protects them, but it simultaneously ensures the Jack family remains lost.
Precisely. The frustration is profound. The RCMP's sustained belief in this tip shows they found the phrasing and the timing credible, even without the ranch name. The fact that the call originated from a party setting creates a theory that maybe the information was overheard, or that the caller was confessing obliquely without taking full responsibility. The RCMP's continued persistence is evidenced by another public appeal they made for this anonymous caller to finally come forward as recently as 2018. They clearly believe this person holds the definitive answer.
In the last few years, we've seen efforts to apply modern search technology, using the general area suggested by that 1996 tip to guide the search.
That's right. In August 2019, police conducted a specific search focusing on property belonging to the Saikus First Nation, which is located generally south of Vanderhoof. This location aligns with the vague south end of a ranch clue, which they had narrowed down to this region.
And they employed highly specialized tools for this cold case. They used ground-penetrating radar, or GPR, which is essential in searching for buried remains or objects. GPR detects disturbances in the soil layers that might indicate burial sites or concealed items even decades after the fact.
Unfortunately, despite the use of this sophisticated technology and the strategic focus based on the tip, the outcome of the 2019 search was negative. No evidence relating to the Jack family was located. This means the 1996 tip remains unverified and the location ambiguous. However, the sources confirmed that the RCMP still maintains an open case file on the Jack family disappearance as of August 2020. This commitment, 31 years after the fact, shows that this case holds profound investigative importance and that the police have not given up hope for closure.
It's important to recognize that the lack of findings doesn't invalidate the tip. It simply means the search location was incorrect, or the definition of South End was misunderstood. The specific claim of burial remains the central piece of dark information guiding the case.
To conclude our analysis, we really have to situate the Jack family's tragedy within its broader geographical and social context. Their disappearance did not happen in a vacuum. The direction they were heading west of Prince George along Highway 16 toward Klugel's Lake is a chilling point on the map of what is known tragically as the Highway of Tears.
This linkage is critical for you to understand the magnitude of the social failure involved here. The Highway of Tears runs between Prince George and Prince Rupert. It is infamous for the multitude of unsolved cases of missing and murdered Indigenous Canadians, predominantly women, stretching back decades.
And while the Jack family case involved 2 adults and 2 children, the fact that Doreen was an Indigenous woman and that the crime occurred in this highly dangerous corridor, it means it is invariably linked to the systemic phenomenon known as missing and murdered Indigenous women, or MMIW. MMIW is a term used to describe the disproportionately high rates of violence, disappearance, and murder suffered by Indigenous women and girls across Canada and the United States. And it's often linked to systemic racism, poverty, and historical trauma.
The Jack family tragedy, therefore, highlights how systemic vulnerability turns into fatal risk. Ronald's desperation to find work, driven by poverty, led him to the exact geographical corridor where such vulnerability is routinely exploited. The sources, summarizing the emotional toll and mystery, correctly dubbed this case Canada's most tragic and spooky modern disappearance.
The tragedy is self-evident, losing 4 people. The spookiness, as you mentioned, lies in the sheer completeness of the Vanishing act. They left an orderly house, indicating a planned return, only to disappear instantly based on an invitation from a stranger. This complete and utter lack of physical evidence or trace for decades is what perpetuates the mystery. The case is cataloged under 1980s missing person cases, mass disappearances, and MMIW, reflecting the layers of pain and difficulty in solving it.
So if we synthesize the most enduring facts that keep this case alive, what are the 2 central tensions that really define the mystery?
The first tension is definitely Ronald's final communication to his mother. Look for him if he didn't come back. That is not the casual farewell of a man going to work. It is a desperate warning that the situation had turned deadly or coercive before he even left the city limits. This shows he had insight into the danger, but he felt trapped by his circumstances, especially that undisclosed debt.
And the second tension, the agonizing half-clue, is the specific, unverified claim made by that anonymous 1996 caller about the family being buried at the south end of an unspecified ranch.
Right. Combining these 2 facts creates a deeply disturbing narrative. A desperate family lured by a plausible cover story into immediate foul play, and the existence of at least one individual who knows the burial location but refuses to provide the necessary detail for closure. The entire case is a study in frustrating near misses and systemic failures.
Let's circle back one last time to the most detailed piece of evidence we have. The description of the unidentified man. We know his extreme height, up to 6'6", his weight, his reddish-brown hair, his specific work clothes, and that distinctive detail of the leather fringes on his work boots. That level of description is remarkable, almost forensic.
It's truly exceptional detail. Normally, a description this clear would lead to an identification, or at least a focused investigation within a few months, especially when cross-referenced against local criminal or transient logging records.
Which raises an essential question for you, the listener, to consider. Given this meticulous description, what does the failure, the complete inability over 36 years to identify or locate this man suggest about the circumstances? There seem to be 2 prevailing possibilities based on the sources.
Possibility 1. The man was a highly transient individual, maybe a seasonal worker or a long-haul trucker, who left the Prince George region immediately after the crime. If he was already on the move, establishing his identity and tracking him becomes exponentially harder, regardless of how good the description is.
Or possibility 2, which is far more unsettling. Could the man have been known locally, but perhaps masked his identity or was protected? Does the inability to match such specific physical markers and attire suggest that the initial job offer wasn't just illegitimate, but that the person who lured the Jack family away was perhaps a respected or integral figure in the local area who immediately dropped the disguise, the beard, the jacket, the specific boots, and was simply never connected to the description.
It leaves us facing the stark reality that perhaps the greatest clue in the entire case, a remarkably detailed description of the perpetrator, has been visible all along, yet has failed to yield an identification, pointing either to a stunning piece of bad luck in tracking a transient or a terrifying piece of calculated, locally protected secrecy.
It is a devastating story of systemic failure, desperation, and an instant catastrophic vanishing act that still haunts British Columbia. We have covered the specific facts as contained in the sources, the family's pre-disappearance struggles, the chilling timeline of August 1989, the early investigation errors linked to systemic bias, the frustrating, persistent, anonymous clue, and the ongoing efforts to bring closure to the Jack family and the Chislata Carrier Nation.
Thanks for listening.